Here we are in Ken Botto's. Talked to him about making photographs. In the kitchen having a cup of tea first before we go outside and look at some shooting setups. Ken's a most delightful guy, and his house is a fascinating array of all the materials he uses in his photography. We'll be looking at this a little later. We're here in the backyard of the photographer Ken Botto in Bolinas. It's a somewhat cool January day, early February. And there's Ken at work down there. Hey, Ken.
Hey, Jack. You're just in time.
What are you doing?
I'm doing this setup. I'm doing this series on portraits of the famous artists and philosophers and poets and the types. And here I'm working on Jack Kerouac, putting him in one of his on-the-road environments.
Aha.
This is the second time I've done this scene. I had him in the city, and I didn't like the city.
So you decided to
put him more of in a rural environment, in a boxcar.
I think I'll come up here with my camera and get behind yours and see what maybe your photograph looks like. Aha, so it's a... Is your camera going to include the environment of the outside trees, or are you concentrated slowly?
Only on the just above the water tower that you can see the real trees.
Uh-huh.
And it'll look like it's way in the distance in the shot.
So here we have, I know it's not quite it. Really
maybe if you take a look through the camera view, you can see what I'm seeing.
I wonder if I could do that.
And then maybe you could do the same thing with your video camera.
Let's see if we can do that.
Can you do that? Does that work?
Tiny bit, but not very good. I can see a little bit of it.
Or at least you look through my camera and see what the camera sees, and maybe you can duplicate it with the video. I don't know.
Well, now that I'm out here and we've shown this to the audience, you know, one of the things that's so fascinating about your work is you do not work in a studio with lights. You work outside.
Yeah.
And you use mirrors to direct the light.
Yes.
What the heck ever got you on to doing this?
Well, it takes me outside. I like being outside. And I like the quality that I get with mirrors. Artificial lights don't do it for me.
And actually,
I often say, well, people say, well, you can do that in the studio, can't you? And I says, yeah, maybe, but I don't think so. I think I want the light quality that we have here living on the coast, which is a special kind of light. And when people see that in the photograph, that you don't get with artificial lights, it's different. And the other thing it actually gets me working with the real world, since I'm creating these incredibly superficial artificial worlds within the real world. I mean, I don't know what to do with the real world. I can't stand the real world, so I have to invent my own world within the real world.
So these are imaginary worlds.
They're imaginary worlds. Yeah.
What would you say they're based on? Because in looking at the total output of your work, there seems to me there's a filmic quality to them, almost like it's a combination of
movie sets, theater
I've seen,
sets,
and you know, like the old serials we might see in the movie theaters that came out in the 40s and stopped in the 50s.
There's something of that. I consider myself a storyteller.
Uh-huh.
I'm telling stories.
Okay, Ken, you're doing this other piece over here I noticed on my way in. Could you tell me a little bit more about that one?
Yeah, that's a little different than this setup. This one it's much more humorous. This whole series has taken me into different kinds of stores to find these things I need for this portrait series. I'm finding myself going to novelty joke shops.
Uh-huh.
I saw this pair of glasses with the penis nose on it, and it took several weeks to put this scene together with Sigmund Freud. And then I had to search to find Sigmund Freud's photograph in a bookstore, so it took me to a bookstore on Valencia Street. Then I ended up reading it's Freud's own story about himself and all his theories, which I realized I had never read before. I always read about people writing about him.
Right.
But it was incredible to read his own words, talking about his own process. And it made a lot more sense reading it from his own words, which made the whole, what I was doing more, gave it another reality. And this is a takeoff on, this is what's currently what's in the news, and I'll give you the title. This is Sigmund Freud, and it's going to have a subtitle, Freud Contemplating Bobbit Phobia.
Bobbit phobia. Let's take a look at this here. Okay, we got the portrait of Sigmund.
Sigmund was run through the copy machine, the laser printer, which is a process in itself, taking the book in. The search for the knife, all came together in one day.
And I know here too that you have this mirror. What's this mirror over here for?
This mirror was to cast a light underneath his nose cock.
Uh-huh. And
otherwise it was too dark.
And so you take these pieces of driftwood and cut off 2x4s.
This is a piece of wood only because the knife has to stick up somewhere. It had to have some way to get it to stand straight up.
And I note too that you have here.
All these are all props that are all being used at different times.
You have all these mirrors around here.
The mirrors are all part of the casting the light on the object.
Uh-huh. Well, let's go over
today when I did shoot this scene, the sun was behind me, so it cast a shadow. So his glasses, there's a shadow. Will be underneath his cheek, and it'll give it another dimension where the glasses are going to start like maybe popping off his face. They'll have a flickering effect in the photograph when it's done.
So one of the difficulties that we as photographers always encounter is kind of taking a three-dimensional world and it turns out two-dimensional. So you're using light from the natural scene on this little setup here, and you're watching it, so it's creating a third dimension.
It's animating the object. And the sun is constantly moving. It's amazing how fast the sun moves because it changes. And I'm always constantly readjusting. And finding the right kind of where I want the cast shadow to be. With the mirrors I can have more control over it. With the sun is always where it is. And the sun isn't quite as strong as you think it is sometimes. The mirrors is what makes the colors pop, brings the colors out of the shadows.
So this is totally unknown to a studio photographer who has a constant source of light with full knowledge and leaves it set up and then works there just to manipulate whatever object's being photographed. You're sort of dancing out here.
I see myself, this is a choreographic process I'm in. In the meantime, I'm running into the house getting props and dealing with the light, the time of the day, the quality of light, the clouds, the sun going in and out behind the clouds, the fog, all of that is important. And it gets and the day, the natural sunlight gives me a different look, a different quality. Sometimes it's high contrast, sometimes it's more low contrast and looks more natural.
Do you work year round?
Yes. At this time of the year, I have the less light to work with.
And
around noon until 2.
Do you find that the quality of light from spring to summer, etc., changes any of the characteristics of the photos?
Yeah, it certainly does.
What about your mood? Does that change your mood, and does it prevail into the subject content?
Well, it may be, but the mood thing has got a life of its own. It's I don't know how much that's dependent on the weather. Only maybe when I can't photograph. You know, when there's stormy day, clouds, too many clouds, too dense.
Since you seem to work a lot.
I work a lot, and then the times when I'm not working, actually photographing, I'm either going over the hill, or I'm getting ready for a photograph, or I'm in search for the next scene, the props for the next scene, next subject.
From what source have you derived your content? Because I've noticed that, in a sense, it's been, I don't know if it's appropriate to call it a critique of American society.
Yeah, I feel I'm something of a social critic of some kind. I'm essentially a moralist, I think. And that's got to come out of my Catholic background, I think. The Catholics are very critical.
You were raised Catholic?
I was raised Catholic, and I was educated. The Catholics are very critical, and they have all these rules and regulations and laws and mostly these infallible kind of things coming down from high on up, and don't do this and don't do that, which as a kid never made much sense to me, and they even make less sense as you get older. So I got to say, I'm a lapsed Catholic. I started lapsing when I was in art school.
Don't tell me art school inspired this lapsing.
Art school ruined me as a Catholic. And the one who did it was, oh my God, what's his name? The Zen Buddhist teacher who lived in Sausalito, Alan Watts. He came to my art history class. I had this art history class by Hal Wimeth, and it was on Eastern thought. And he brought Alan Watts in, and here I was sitting here with him laying, wallowing in the mire of Catholicism, and Alan Watts came in with this Eastern, thinking and ways, a new way of thinking, and just changed my my whole philosophy of life, and kind of like in one. I mean, it was more, and of course it was more complicated than that, but it's one of those moments you get in life when one teacher says or does something to you that really has an effect, especially at that age. I was about 18 years old.
In one of the prior interviews I was having with Judy North, she had mentioned that Eastern thought, primarily Buddhism, had been a very powerful motivation in her life.
Oh, that's mine too. I had this Zen monk, Mr. Hayakawa, who was at Arts and Crafts at the time. He actually died in the class. I mean, he never finished the semester, but he had an incredible influence.
Okay. What is influence? What sort of an influence was it? I mean, you're doing this social critique here. How did you derive this social critique from this kind of learning that caused you to throw Catholicism out and become closer to who you would like to be?
Yeah, Catholicism was this, well, let's put it this way. I think the teachers, my grade school and I went to Catholic grammar school and high school, they weren't that good, the teachers themselves, at teaching Catholicism to begin with. I think they do a lot better job today, from what I hear. They're not as uptight, they're not as restricted, they're not as narrow in their concept of the world. And ultimately, they always said we had to make the final decision, If we thought it was right for us, we could do it. But there was a big but. They didn't encourage us to do it. No, you can do it, but, and like Zen came in, no, you can do it. So you can do it. You're free to do it.
One of my foreign students, right at this moment, was talking. It just arrived in California. Said that he had never seen such a place as the Art Institute, where freedom prevailed. Coming from Germany, there was a practical way to do things, and if he tried to put an extra mark on a paper or make a photograph slightly different than normal, they were saying to him that, okay, that's very interesting.
But
that might be you, but... So this is what you were running against.
Well, I had those teachers, those very same teachers in art school, because they were run out of Europe, and they came to the U.S. Mr. Stern was from the Bauhaus. And he said, this is the way you do it.
That's the way you do it.
This is the way you do it.
Uh-huh.
And we had to jump through his loops, and it was a design class.
Now tell me, I mean, I want to go back to this idea of your criticism of society. Some of the two themes I've looked at recently in your work. One is the Barbie doll. You've used that. You've used the large city, like I would call it Gotham. And now you're using portraits of important people in American history that have, sort of formulated some of our contemporary values.
Absolutely, especially our aesthetic ones. And so that's taken. I'm not that critical about what these people have done, but it's more like honoring them, and acknowledging what they have done, and also like getting in the origins of modernism, which I find I'm sort of the tail end of that process, or playing with that process. Or I'm not taking it as seriously as they did, because it was all new to them and they were breaking new ground. And maybe, is that what this postmodernist thing is about? I don't know. Or they did it all. The first half of the 20th century is, to me, is much more interesting than the second half in a lot of different ways.
Does postmodernism play any role in your mind at all, to you?
A little bit. But I don't know, I'm following my own beat somewhere. The conceptual aspect of modernism is, I find, kind of dull and a little boring. It seems very detached and very disconnected.
Well, essentially, when World War II started to hit its peak in the 30s, approximately 65,000 artists left Europe and came to the United States.
Yeah, and some of them came to my art school.
Brought with them all their baggage. Yeah. Some of them came to your art school.
Yes.
And in a weird way, I've been feeling that postmodernism might be the American way to break the shackles, even though it's French philosophy.
The French conceptual way of thinking really had a hold on this country, and we couldn't. And I can see why the abstract expressionists did what they did. They had to really free themselves from that process.
Let's go sit down and talk about this a little bit more.
All right. Where do you want to sit?
The reason I said that is these...
the way I work, I think my advantage is I'm self-taught in photography. I never had to unlearn whatever I would have been taught in school to do what I do. So I have to actually make it up as I go along.
So you're not too concerned about the technical aspects of the medium?
Well, I work within a very narrow, limited range. I kind of do the same thing over and over again. I don't consider myself a photographer. I'm not a photographer.
Or if we were talking about sex in the 90s, I don't know what it was we were talking about.
We're talking about me being a self-taught photographer.
Self-taught photographer, exactly. And you've chosen a limited portion of the medium to work in, but
very limited. But it works for me within my range, and I keep thinking I'm just going to get tired of this process eventually, but it keeps growing and changing.
Okay, well, let's just, for the audience, what is your process?
I guess it's converting how I see the world into a miniature world that I can manipulate and invent out in my backyard and tell these stories that I tell, these open-ended stories.
Why didn't you choose painting? I mean, you could stay inside your house.
I wasn't painting. I was painting, and the painting it wasn't working for me anymore.
What does photography have as an advantage?
Well, at the time, it was like it was new for me. It was all new, and I had to. It was like the process was. It had more. What are you going to say? Whatever I had to say wasn't with paint anymore. You know, the process of painting. Photography is more immediate, and photography, well, the great thing about photography, it deals with memory, that I like. You know? And painting can do that, but not, painting doesn't do it that well. And then you can manipulate the photograph. And then I like the trompe-l'oeil effect of photography. And you can play with the process. People want to believe in photography, but it's the last thing they should believe in. It's a photograph. It's so great at telling incredible lies.
How true.
How true it is.
Well, no, there's one of the. I don't want
to collage. I like the process of collaging. I can collage with photography. I mean, you don't have the tactile, you don't have the surface that you do in painting. I mean, the process is totally different. And I think photography is more conceptual. I mean...
Well, certainly one of the things you were mentioning, to miniaturize the world.
To miniaturize the world.
What about that old adage from Shakespeare, you know, the world is a stage and we're the players upon it?
Yes, and that's exactly what it's about. I can act out my... I don't say it's my fantasy world. I don't know how much... Fantasy always, you know, it has a bad rep. Sounds like you're not dealing with realities. You're kind of making things up as you go along. Mm-hmm. But I think it's more the imagination rather than fantasy. The imaginative world.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
That gets at something that the factual world, you know, really doesn't go too far.
You know, you probably run into that a lot as a criticism of your work. People think it's like more of a fantasy world than an imaginative one.
Yeah, and especially in today's world. And also the public sees it that way too.
Uh-huh.
I discovered. They question the fantasy world as if, oh, that's not real. You know, you're not dealing with the real world. As if I was photographing the real world, that's even more real than what I'm doing. It isn't. It's just the degrees. It's just that's what I said. They want to believe. They want to believe what they see in a photograph.
Absolutely.
And it's the.
Well, you're surrounded by these items of.
Yeah, this is central casting.
Central casting. Let's just take a look at these things here. You have looks like there's even a Venus of Willendorf there.
There certainly are. I went through a period where the Venus of Willendorf was a big focus of my photography. And this one here is another. I was putting these 25,000 old creatures next to these contemporary floozies.
There we go. There's a contemporary floozy up there.
As well as the Venuses of antiquity. And combining all these Venuses.
Next to these icons of truth, the Beatles.
The Beatitudes.
Yeah. And dogs and
More
people.
people, headless men, a wolf, howling wolf. And then we have Wile E. Coyote, which is another comical mythological creature that's full of wisdom. Also, this lady, see the Italian Venus back there?
Yeah.
She's in one of my photographs right now that's in a group show in the city at the Robert Koch Gallery. A show that has an erotic theme.
What about Eros? You certainly have touched on that in some of your recent work, which we'll look at. But you were using Barbie in a very, very strange context.
Yeah, Barbie, I'm probably more known for her than anything I've done. Only because she's gotten out into the world, she's got her life of her own. There's a whole world out there, a whole media world that just can't seem to get enough of Barbie and what she is. And there's a book coming out, an anthology on Barbie. It's coming out in the spring that I'm going to be in, and of which I think it's a book that's going to free itself from the control of Mattel. Mattel is like Disney. They always had this incredible control of Barbie, how she was seen in the world, and how she was represented. Nothing less than perfect. And this book is going to squeak. It's going to squeak through the cracks of their system, I think, if she gets away with it. The Barbie myth.
What is the Barbie myth? Let's talk about Barbie in relationship to the American woman and what reality is. Let's have a seat.
Barbie is an interesting American phenomenon. Because her inventor was this woman who lived in California here in the 50s, who noticed that her children, her son named Ken and her daughter named Barbie, were actually playing more with their cutout dolls, which were of real live people, or they're more adult figures, rather than playing with their baby dolls, their baby-like dolls. Now, why that had started happening in the 50s, I don't know, whether it has something to do with television. Again, the imagination was looking for the more realistic.
Are you implying that with the loss of radio and the introduction of television into the culture, that perhaps there was a kind of a fascination with reality that had been...
The imagination, I mean, in radio you had to invent the world in your head. You invented pictures. And with television, you sat by passively as it was all done for you. So she watched her own children, what they liked playing with, which were cut out paper dolls of adult people, or women, I guess in this case, putting clothes on them. They like, putting the clothes on and off. And so, on a trip to Germany, she discovered this adult gag toy, porn toy, actually, for men, mostly, of this adult figure, about 6 inches, 8 inches tall, was called the Lily doll. And she had adult attributes, but she was still a doll, but more realistic. So she brought the idea back to America, made it into an 11-inch doll, and was inspired by what was currently going on in the TV world then, like the Honeymooners, like Audrey Meadows, and Playboy, and made this doll to look like a creature from the media world of that time, with these unrealistic, elongated legs and arms, and got the copyright in '57, marketed in '59, and nobody thought the thing would even go over. Thought it would be a flop, and she took off. The whole thing took off. Kids started buying them, or was it their parents buying them for the kids?
Do you think that Barbie has had such an influence on our culture that it's distorted the young American, average American woman's?
Oh, I think she's part of that. There's lots of investigations have been done about this, including two local young ladies that I met about 5 years ago who were trying to do a book on Barbie but didn't go anywhere. And so they interviewed a lot of young people, including at the Art Institute. They went around asking what they thought about Barbie, both men and women, young boys, young women, young girls, and they got some incredible responses, and a lot of it was hostile, a lot of hostility.
What for?
A lot of girls, unless a lot of girls didn't match up to what Barbie looked like. I mean, she was an image that it was a pretty hard. I mean, it was again it's that anorexia look.
You think this prevails in advertising, both on television and in virtually all the media?
Yeah, I think it all does, and it's. Have you seen the latest model, that emaciated Kate Moss? She's even skinnier than oh my God, what was it? Twiggy. Remember Twiggy of the '60s?
Sure.
Well, she's even more emaciated than her. And she's one of the latest. She's in commercials on television now. She's got this waifish, she looked like she was just let out of a concentration camp, look on her face.
Okay, now, a lot of this stuff has, I mean, you've given a little definition of
a little bun.
Part of a social phenomena in our society. There are other things, too, such as the automobile.
The automobile.
Yeah, I mean, you're including a lot of automobiles. You've had some car wrecks, and the diner. The diner seems very important. You make very few, what I would call rural scenes. Virtually all your work seems to be devoted to the city. It's mostly
the city. I have done rural scenes, and I'm trying to. I have done a lot of Western scenes. And I'll go back to it too. A lot of them were a lot of the Marlboro men, as posters and billboards out in the rural environment. But as you can see, I mean, where do you put a lot of this stuff? And I mean, I can't get too much into the environment because it's. Well, how do I fit this stuff into it? It's limited. It's more limited than the city.
Well, it's as if the industry, perhaps, that has been, let's say, from Dickensian times, when reality really started to hit, when photography became noticed by the public in the 1860s, Manet. I mean, you can kind of date the Industrial Revolution to that time, Civil War, etc., American Civil War. Since that time, there's this building up in the city, and the city is the one that's gone crazy and seems to have the power, but the rural world, it's just tried to exist as if nature created it. So maybe that's one of the reasons you don't want to go there and critique.
But it's the rural world is constantly at the mercy of the city world that keeps encroaching on it. It's the rural world is having a hard time hanging on, I think. Or hanging on in some kind of pristine or kind of, and it's hanging on to its own integrity. And at that time, most people lived on farms. Up until maybe the Second World War. The Second World War had a profound effect on this country. It moved people out of the country into the cities. And once I came into the cities and got the independence of working in the war plants and got the independence of having their own, especially women making their own money, it was hard for them to go back to that old, hard to go back to the country when they saw Gay Paris. I think that had a profound effect on them.
It certainly displaced people.
Displaced people, and what is it? It was the military-industrial thing that was displacing them. And it's displacing them ever since.
Your work, on one hand, is very light, and one can open it up on a calendar or in that delightful book of yours, and
that's my older work.
Cursorily look at it and see a lightness, but underneath that, I don't want to say there's a darkness.
There is a dark side.
But there is you are very serious in your life about...
I'm serious at what I'm doing, yes, of course.
But you seem to...
But I'm having fun at doing it.
You're having fun. That's I think, the enjoyment that art seems to bring to the individual, but you're hurting. You're hurting about the rest of the world.
I'm, absolutely. I agree with you.
You're sad. It's in other words,
there's a sadness there, and it's a lot what the beatniks were talking about. They were a sad bunch. They looked at the world and I don't know how else to put that. It comes out that way. If I'm gonna be truthful to myself, it's gonna. I mean, there's lots of people who just like what I do. If I could just put them on what I do on black backgrounds and show the toys, they'd love it. I'd probably be more of a commercial success if I could just, stay away from actually talking about or hitting the dark side. But to me, the dark side is where things are really at.
Where truth lies.
Truth lies, and I'm more interested in truth rather than packaging and making things.
So being a commercial success really is something that, to a degree, is abhorrent to you. It's not that you don't want it.
It's not that I don't want it. It would be great if it came to me in my own terms.
Yeah.
Because every artist would like that, but only a few artists get to have that privilege, I think.
Mm-hmm. So I would agree.
It's not granted on a lot, and there's very few artists that have that. That can do both.
Well, I'd like to touch on a few other subjects because this social critique is I think it's extremely important today. As we're heading toward the end of the millennium, there is more and more awareness of overpopulation. There's a frankness about certain social diseases. AIDS is very, very prominent, but it's as if the world is in chaos. That movie Koyana Squatsi, the world is out of balance. And the seriousness of your work is, I think,
well,
right on target.
I question that premise. When was it ever in balance? I wonder. When was the world ever in balance, where everybody thought it was... Every age complained, every age had its problems. I mean, the Middle Ages had the plague, we got AIDS. So I think it's just ongoing, except there's just too many people and the technology has gotten too scary. It's gotten out of control more. World War I had a profound effect on the art world. Even more so than World War II, I think. What did the artists do after World War II? They kind of went hiding in the process of abstract expressionism and action painting. They want to deal with the world. And then the pop world came bursting through that out of England. say, hey, this is what's real. I mean, look around us. And here, and I mean, I grew up in that era of the abstract expressionist, kind of believing those ideas and that philosophy. But now I look back at that era, and none of that work seems to say too much to me anymore.
Too nihilistic? Like
It's too subjective, too concerned with art, maybe. You know, too concerned with
art for art's sake.
Art for art's sake. Maybe it needed to be done at the time, and also, maybe that process needed to be done to break away from the Western, from the European traditions, probably. You know, they needed to do that at that time. And,
well, I'd always felt that it was probably a European idea to begin with, with all those transplants over here,
and Americanized.
Represented almost a destructive methodology. But ironically enough, it seemed to me that, you know, it was kind of like the painter discovering his palette again, or their palette, I should say.
Yeah.
Similar to the Impressionists, when photography came along, actually, and seemed to take away the objective reality that painters have been struggling for centuries.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Degas used the camera. A lot of those 19th century artists were into the camera, photographs.
Let's talk a little bit about your most recent thoughts and how you came to decide to do portraits.
Well, that happened. I was invited to be part of a portrait show in Point Reyes. And all the artists had to contribute something which they thought was their portrait. Could be anything you want. So I did mine. You haven't seen it, have you? I should show you probably a photograph of it. And and also opened up another area for me. Whoops.
Oh yeah, that portrait does look like you. And here's Rimbaud.
Yeah.
Tell me about Rimbaud.
Oh, Rimbaud was a fascinating poet. He led this incredible life, and that's the other thing about this series is I'm getting into and I'm reading about all these artists and these poets, which is fascinating, which I was doing anyway, but I got even more so into them.
Hey, here's Magritte, René Magritte.
Magritte is one of the. He's the one. He loves just playing with reality. He's one of my favorite artists.
I'm glad to see you included some women in here. Here's Gertrude Stein.
Gertrude Stein, and I've got some other ones, and they haven't. They seem to be harder to get to work. I did one of Merritt Oppenheim. It was kind of like.
Okay, here's Guillaume Apollinaire.
He was kind of the reading now. Oh my gosh, who's the New York who worked for the Museum of Modern Art in the 50s, died in the 60s? Frank O'Hara. I'm beginning to see him as kind of a Frank O'Hara was an Apollinaire of his time.
Ah, who's this? X-ray vision.
That's Man Ray.
Majority of these images seem to be set on a similar city street here.
Yeah, with cityscapes, city environments. And before I started getting into the portrait series, and then that slowly, the portrait series is kind of they're getting, as you look at some of them, there's kind of a platform below rather than a building.
Who's this Jew?
That's Max Jacob. He was actually one of the few artists that actually died in a concentration camp for being Jewish.
Right.
And and it was a horrible story behind that because Picasso could have done more for him and he didn't. He didn't want to stick his neck out for him.
And that prior image that was pixelated, that was Picasso.
Yes.
Mr. Felt Hat. That's just a straight portrait of Boyce.
Yeah, I've already reshot that.
You didn't have enough, say, animation in this one?
I didn't. He looked like he seemed to be looking down at something. I think his reputation for being an artist is greater than anything that he ever did.
That's interesting.
Yeah, like I think his great story being a Stutka pilot and crashing in World War II, and then being rescued by the peasants, wrapping him up in fat and felt, and then he did all those pieces using felt.
What about Mr. Kerouac here? God, that's a nice one. Is that the one you just shot?
That's the one I just shot. This is the one. This is when he's in the city, and I decided that I may still use that one. I don't know. Maybe it's the one I did today isn't going to work.
What about this guy with the hat here? The stereo picture of some guy in his hat.
Art Crumb, yeah.
Robert Crumb.
That's a portrait of him done by his girlfriend, an oil painting. Which was in color. I did it reduced to black and white. Monumental environment.
Ah, Monsieur Baudelaire.
Monsieur Baudelaire.
Oui. Positive, negative.
Mm-hmm. He certainly had a dark side to him.
Oui, oui.
Even positive.
Here's a strange one. Negative person. Looks like it's John Kennedy backwards or something.
Oh, that's an old image, and I put that in there. And I did that about, 9 months ago. And I'm thinking, well, this is part of this series, I guess. I'm going to probably redo that one, too.
Oh, look at this, Ken. Here's the original Freud piece. So that you're out redoing that today.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
I can see you have a different angle on it.
I did a different angle, and I have to get the full head in there. It being cropped at the top the way it is in that one I don't like it. Which all these are done by the laser printer, enlarging them, getting details, doing the negative and positive, and doing the mosaicing. It's all. So that machine getting what the computer printer does is become part of my process. Whereas my other series, I used to just collage more, and use things that I found in magazines and on the streets.
Are you actually thinking of working with a computer?
I don't know. For me so far, the computer lacks the depth and the richness of a photograph. So far, I don't know. And the thing, I feel like I can do anything in three-dimensional that a computer does anyway in two-dimensional. I don't know what a computer would give me. Maybe it could be faster or something. I don't know what it would do for me. I'm getting the real sky in when I want to get the real sky in. You could do that on a computer, put the sky in, but I like the real sky. The real sky looks real. And the computer sky would never look that way. There's an uncanny quality when you shoot the real world. It comes through when I try to fake like stonework, spray painting it, and I get a piece of marble that I find somewhere. Like I just picked up a piece of marble at the new cultural center at Moscone Center. They were still working on the marble, cutting out pieces of marble that was going somewhere, and they had the saw, and I just picked up this piece this fragment that they were going to throw away. And it has the weight and the feel, and you can't, some way the camera likes the real thing in some funny way.
Well, I've felt that photography has always been a fictive reality. You seem to feel that. And
fictive.
Fictive.
Fictive meaning, what's fictive? Fictitious?
Fictional.
Fictional.
Made up by yourself. The reality is your interpretation. And you seem to be taking, in your social criticism, a viewpoint that you're working with icons, but you're not really putting it on a stage set. You really need a little bit of reality. You need sunlight, reality. You need daylight,
I need lots of reality.
Blue sky, you need a few trees.
Otherwise, see, my world is fake and phony enough as it is. If I went into a studio, it looked like food processing or food photographs or what you see in magazines too much, I think. You gotta have that artificial look, that idealized, everything perfect look. Where if you do it outside, I mix the realities, the real world against the fictitious world. So the two create their own reality.
Would you say
which
it's
is
fair?
neither fictitious or real.
Would you say it's fair to the viewer that comes across your work that they should look at it as maybe as closely as a documentary photography?
You know, what Aid at the gallery once told me, she says, with your work, you challenge the viewer too much. Which maybe I give the viewer too much work to do. I mean, experienced people like ourselves can see it right away, but a lot of people don't. They don't want to go through this. Is this real? Is this not real? Where's this come from? What is this? What, dot, 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 dot.
Well, a little bit of hindsight here. Is it the duty of the artist to pay attention to the viewer and make their work fit so you're not challenging them too much? In other words, it's a balance on trying to find out how to challenge them correctly?
I don't know.
Is that
it? Is that the job of the artist? And not to get too far out, not to get too much for them to do? Or is it, do you just do what you do and let them figure it out for themselves?
I think you do what you do.
Yeah. But
And
if you want to be a commercial success, I think you can't deal within this ambiguous world too much. Viewers don't like too much ambiguity.
No, they don't. It's too tough on them.
Too tough.
Also, culturally, I think they have problems. I've always felt, to take our classic example of the true artist, I think the American public think it's Van Gogh because he struggled his whole life, and they are so happy that he gets all this money. But I think
he got one money.
Well, I mean that a Van Gogh sells for.
Oh, now.
Yeah. I think the American public is very happy about that.
Yeah, but the American public, when Van Gogh came out, couldn't give him the time of day if they saw his works.
Totally rejected.
They would have rejected him immediately.
I don't know what that was leading up to, but we were talking about commercial success and how your gallery person was talking to you about challenging the viewer. Have you ever thought at all when you're creating your work that you're challenging the viewer?
I think I'm challenging myself. Otherwise, I think I would get bored. And that's what keeps this going for me. Is it keeps growing and keeps changing, and I have to keep that level of trying to of that getting into that world where what is this? Is it of making the make-believe look like it's real, and the real making it look like it's make-believe? People say, is that the real sky? And it's a real sky.
So they can see that when it's real.
Yeah, if they want to, they have to look. They can't give it a cursory TV 1 second look. I think today's viewer, they're so conditioned by TV, flickering. Or maybe I'm being hard on everybody, I don't know. They don't even read magazines anymore, or they got the magazine view of the world.
Well, we started out.
I think art has to take time. Paintings. I think if it's any good, it takes time to look at it. And a lot of art is limited time. It's just what you see is what you get, and you can get it in half a second, and there's nothing more there, unless you want to think about it.
Well, it's a lot like reading a book, as you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah. I don't know. Artwork that has too much, blah 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 next to it, I find a little suspicious. It's like going up to a painting and finding out how much it cost. This is $50,000. This must. Oh, now I'll look at this now. This is $100,000. Oh, this must be good. But that's very American. the price of everything and the value of nothing. It's my moralistic side coming out again.
Well, you talk about that, it seems, a little bit in your work.
Yeah, I do. I don't know.
So ultimately, this work of yours, I think, is a finely tuned social critique of the time you live in.
Mm-hmm. Especially when I work on current things like the Bobbit phenomenon.
Do you find that comical, or do you find that sad?
Oh, it's incredibly sad. I don't see how it's sad and comical. It's a tragedy. It's I mean, if she had cut off his arm, it would never got made the news. You know. And it's a story that makes a lot of males very nervous. You know. And finally, they got something in the news that makes them nervous. Yeah.
Do you think that the male is getting, in general, more nervous?
He's getting very more nervous. Because women have had to put up with this shit for centuries. Yeah, for centuries.
So well, you're actually espousing. I mean, you're not a feminist, but
well, I'm not anti-feminist either. No, you know who I like in that world is Camille Paglia. I think her view of all that is much more realistic. These hardcore feminists, I think, are very funny. What's her name? McKinnon? Naomi Wolf. When I hear them talk, especially when they talk about art history, is how incredibly ignorant they are. When they talk about pornography, as if pornography is something discovered in the last 20 years or something.
Mm-hmm. So you're happy that men are uptight today, and that,
I'm not happy about that.
Well, I mean, the laughter.
It's a nervous laughter.
Let's put it, nervous, but on the other hand, you seem to be appreciating that a lot of men are uptight, we'll say, and that the woman who you said had struggled and had to put up with stuff for centuries. Well, in other words, there's seems like a more equal value.
Yeah, they can't be as arrogant as they once were, I think. Mm-hmm. I look at 19th century men, incredibly arrogant, you know, sexist, and the whole attitude towards sex and everything women were really in kind of a third-class position.
Would you put into this category, now that women are getting equal say in more of an equal say in contemporary life, do you have hopes that some disenfranchised people, such as the American black, and perhaps the now growing group of the Hispanics, do you think that is there a hope that they'll have a more equal voice?
Yeah, I think they are doing that, but you know, they once said that, oh, look at all these new women politicians getting in there, as if just the gender of just being a woman is going to add something to the political reality that's going to be that much different than what men do. I haven't seen a lot of that yet. I think it's who's ever in power or in positions of authority accumulate all the myopic and disadvantages and all the arrogance of power, no matter who they are. But at the same time, I think that what's going to save this country is the minorities. I think that's where the real strength of this country is. But then when I look at the new cultural center opened up in the South of Market, the Moscone Center, what was that called?
Yerba Buena.
Yerba Buena. I haven't seen anything in those shows that I like all that much either. when I look at the artwork coming from that.
There are some interesting pieces. There was Hilda Shum, Paul Berg's piece on the can't think of the name of it, the eunuch, Chinese eunuch, and Betty Saar had a beautiful piece.
Betty Saar is good.
That was
she's always good, and her daughter is even better in some ways. Did you see that show in Oakland of her daughter?
No, I didn't.
That was an incredible show. Her daughter is very strong in her own. She's more of a feminist and more contemporary.
Well, as a last note to just touch on, Ken, and perhaps stay away a little bit from the social critique. When I look through the portraits of some of these authors in there, Apollinaire and Baudelaire, are there other authors that have influenced?
I've barely scratched the surface. I'm just using the ones that I can find, lay my hands on their photographs real easy.
So literature is actually a very heavy component of your work?
Yeah, I think literature has actually literature actually changes things. I think art really doesn't all that much. Like the art world. I think poetry has a profound effect on it, and it actually changes the way people think.
Poetry, I mean, now you're picking something that, I mean, the poet is the starving artist.
Yeah, it really is.
But you feel it. You feel it.
Not in our society, they don't. Too much. Our society just totally dismissed them. But in the French culture, European culture, the poet was had an influence.
Well, maybe the poet making everything so succinct and lyrical condenses everything down to a point where a short story or an author do you think something like that could happen in our society, and then people like yourself pick up on literature?
Yeah.
I mean, you're giving a lot of power to the written word where we've been condemning television and the like.
The visual world is. God, I envy Czechoslovakia have a playwright as a president. To me, I almost want to move there because of that. In some ways, I find that amazing. And here we have our presidents are virtually illiterate.
Well, they had a playwright as a president, and we had an actor.
An actor, and but a second-rate actor, not even a good actor.
So theoretically, the playwright is the inventor of the ideas.
Precisely. I think the ideas come through stronger, and the visual ideas are all right, but they. Like Guernica didn't. How much effect did Guernica have on Franco? Not much. But literary ideas can become revolutionary. Though the Surrealists thought they were being revolutionary, but that was a big literary movement too, as well. Well, that's what I miss. I think I find that in history. Maybe that's being too conservative, but history seems to be more about ideas, bigger ideas, revolutionary ideas. And today it seems to be all about celebrities and notoriety and making money in the art world.
Well, it seems that there's a little bit of that decay I recognize in relation to the fall of the Roman Empire. I read Gibbon,
or the French, or the Academy was certainly like that. And it was very superficial, and it was all very decorative.
Let's just touch on that for a second in relation to the medium you're working in, because photography has grown to a tremendous prominence in the United States and the world as a legitimate art form. Majority of the practitioners have gone through some school. Do you think that the academization of the medium has perhaps affecting it?
Oh, sure.
You see a lot of clones or similarities?
Similarities.
Do you think the medium is actually growing any? Is it of interest to you as much as it once was prior?
Again, I'm drawn to people. like photographers like Dwayne Michaels. I mean, somebody like Cindy Sherman, I find very thin.
Thin. You don't think she's making a social critique in any way?
Uh, Not when I look at the photographs. You can read about it, and you can read the blurb next to it. But when I look at her photographs, they don't. I don't think there's enough there.
So, boy, this is a tough one to talk about. But would you say that a lot of her ideas are based upon theatrics stemming from films rather than the tough real life of daily living?
Yeah, I guess that's sure.
Because they seem surface in that sense.
They seem, but I wonder if she stopped getting all this attention, whether there would be anything there. Can they stand on their own? I don't know. Time will tell, I guess.
Have you seen her recent work, which is, bodies cut in half, genitalia?
Yeah.
Huge scale.
Yeah. I saw them as pornographic. They were more pornographic than what she was ranting and raving about. I know what she's trying to do, make a comment on the male gaze of the feminine body and all that, but her depictions were even more outrageous.
Well, it seemed that when she is talking about reality, it's very dark, and when she's talking about women's roles, she's copying it from films, and they seem kind of fluffy.
Fluffy, yeah.
I'm kind of paraphrasing your implications here.
Or is it posturing? A lot of posturing. I don't know. This gender roles concept in art is, I don't know. It intrigued me for a while, and then I guess I've, I don't know. What is it? Is it a lot of complaining? Whining?
From the medium's part?
Yeah. I guess the whole country's doing it. Whenever I go to Europe, boy, I don't see them having these problems. When I'm in Paris sitting at a party around men and women, it seems to be the women know their women, the men know their men, whatever that is, and they're they just know who they are. But when you get in a room full of Americans, they don't know who they are.